The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony like it did every other day, painting the prefabricated buildings in shades of orange and gold. Katie Brooks was 7 years old, and she loved mornings on this frontier world because the sky turned colors she had never seen back on Earth. She stood outside the small school building with her best friends, Lucy and Ben, tossing a bright red ball between them. The ball was special because her grandmother had sent it all the way from Earth, and it bounced higher here because of the lower gravity. The colony was buzzing with unusual activity today. A Galactic Council inspection team had arrived the night before, and everyone was nervous about making a good impression. New Haven was only 3 years old, one of the newest human settlements in Council space, and this inspection would determine if they could expand their borders and receive additional resources. Katie's mother had explained it all during breakfast, telling her to stay close to the school and not wander off. Katie had nodded seriously, but now, watching the ball arc through the alien sky, she had mostly forgotten the warning. Commander Zixthar of the Velkari species stepped off her shuttle with the bearing of someone who owned the universe. She was tall, nearly 8 feet, with scaled skin that shimmered blue and green in the sunlight. Her species had been part of the Galactic Council for over 3,000 years, and she carried that legacy in every precise movement. To her, humans were barely civilized, newcomers from a barbaric death world who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than wisdom. She had reviewed the files on Earth during the voyage, reading about their wars and violence with barely concealed disgust. These creatures needed guidance, structure, discipline. The inspection was proceeding smoothly until Lucy threw the ball too hard. It sailed over Katie's head, bounced once, twice, and rolled directly toward the landing platform where the inspection team was reviewing supply manifests. Katie's eyes went wide, and without thinking, she ran after it. The ball was from Grandma. She couldn't lose it. Her small legs pumped as she chased it across the open ground, her blonde ponytail streaming behind her. She was laughing because running in low gravity always made her feel like she was flying. She scooped up the ball just as she crossed into the restricted zone. The security barriers were down because the inspection team was coming through, and nobody had thought a child would run into the area. Katie grabbed her ball and turned around, still smiling, and found herself looking up at Commander Zixthar. The alien officer's face was a mask of cold disapproval. Katie froze. She had been taught that aliens could look scary, but most of them were nice. Yet something about the way this one stared down at her made her stomach feel strange. Commander Zixthar saw a perfect opportunity to demonstrate proper discipline. These humans let their young run wild, undisciplined, and chaotic. A firm correction now would teach them the importance of boundaries and respect. She raised her data tablet, a solid rectangular device made of dense alloy, and brought it down in a swift arc across the child's face. The sound of impact echoed across the platform. Katie's head snapped to the side from the force. The ball flew from her hands. She stumbled backward and fell, landing hard on the concrete. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then Katie started screaming. Blood poured from her nose, streaming down her face and onto her yellow shirt. Her cheekbone was visibly swollen, the skin already turning purple. Daniel Brooks was 50 yards away, discussing water filtration systems with another engineer, when he heard his daughter scream. Every parent knows that sound, the difference between a scared cry and a hurt cry. He turned and ran faster than he had ever run in his life. His boots pounded against the ground, his heart hammered in his chest. He could see Katie on the ground, blood everywhere, and the tall alien standing over her. He dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the damage. Her nose was broken. He could see that immediately. Her cheek was fractured. She was sobbing, choking on blood, her small hands reaching for him. He pulled off his shirt and pressed it gently against her face, trying to stop the bleeding while making soothing sounds that meant nothing because his mind was white with rage. Helen Price, the colony administrator, arrived seconds later with the security team. She was a career diplomat who had negotiated dozens of treaties, but when she saw Katie Brooks bleeding on the ground, something cold settled in her chest. She looked at Commander Zixthar and said in a voice that shook with barely controlled fury that the alien was under arrest for assault on a minor. Commander Zixthar showed no remorse. She straightened her uniform and stated calmly that the child had violated restricted space and required correction. In Velkari society, physical discipline was normal and necessary. She had diplomatic immunity under council law and would not submit to arrest by primitives who could not control their offspring. The Marathi representative, a smaller, gray-skinned being named Solace, rushed forward with apologies streaming from his translator. He was genuinely distressed, his large eyes reflecting real sympathy, but he confirmed what Zixthar had said. Council law protected diplomatic officers from local prosecution. The matter would need to go through official channels. It could take months, possibly years. He promised to file the reports immediately. Daniel Brooks heard none of this. He was cradling Katie, whispering that she would be okay, that Daddy was here. The medical team arrived and carefully took her from his arms. They rushed her toward the clinic. Daniel stood slowly, his shirt soaked with his daughter's blood, and looked at Commander Zixthar. He did not say anything. He did not threaten. He simply looked at her with eyes that promised something terrible was coming. Commander Zixthar was escorted back to her ship by Solace, who was frantically trying to explain that humans were sensitive about their young, and this situation was very unfortunate. She dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. She had done nothing wrong. The child had learned a valuable lesson about respecting authority. If the humans wished to file a complaint through proper channels, they were welcome to do so. By evening, every person in New Haven Colony had seen the security footage. The video showed everything in crystal clarity. Katie running after her ball with innocent joy, the moment she realized she had crossed into the wrong area. Commander Zixthar raising the tablet, the strike, the blood, the screaming. The footage was sent to Earth on the evening data packet, routine transmission that carried personal messages and official reports. By morning, 6 billion humans had watched a 7-year-old girl get her face broken by an alien who felt no remorse. The video went viral across every human world and station. It played on news feeds and personal screens. Parents watched it while holding their own children closer. Soldiers watched it in their barracks. Politicians watched it in their offices. And with each viewing, something ancient and terrible stirred in the human species. In the clinic, Katie Brooks lay sedated while the doctors repaired her shattered cheekbone and reset her broken nose. Her mother Claire sat beside her bed, holding her small hand, tears running silently down her face. Her father Daniel stood at the window, staring out at the stars, and when Claire finally spoke, her voice was completely calm. She said 3 words that her husband would never forget. Make them pay. Fleet Admiral George Hayes was eating breakfast when his aide burst into his private quarters on Luna Station without knocking. The young lieutenant's face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he held out a tablet. Hayes took it, annoyed at the interruption, and pressed play on the video file. 30 seconds later, he was no longer annoyed. 30 seconds later, he was watching a recording that would change galactic history. He watched it 3 times without speaking. Then he stood up, straightened his uniform, and told his aide to convene an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs within the hour. The video of Katie Brooks had reached Earth 8 hours after the incident. The first 1,000,000 views came within 20 minutes. By the time Admiral Hayes walked into the conference room at Luna Command, over 3 billion humans had seen it. The other military commanders were already seated, their faces grim. Nobody spoke as Hayes took his position at the head of the table. He did not need to explain why they were there. Every person in that room had already watched a child get struck down by an alien who showed no remorse. General Patricia Cole of the Marine Corps spoke first. She had 3 grandchildren, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were hard as steel. She asked what the diplomatic response had been so far. The answer came from Admiral Hayes. The diplomatic response was nothing. The Galactic Council had acknowledged receipt of the complaint. They had expressed sympathy. They had explained that Commander Zixthar had diplomatic immunity and that proper procedures would need to be followed. The earliest hearing date available was 6 months away. Maybe longer. The room erupted. 6 months while that alien walked free. 6 months while humans were expected to smile and cooperate and pretend everything was fine. 6 months while a 7-year-old girl recovered from a broken face and nightmares. General Raymond Martinez slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. He said something that everyone in the room was thinking, but nobody had yet voiced. He said that diplomatic channels had failed, and it was time for other options. Admiral Hayes held up one hand for silence. He had been expecting this reaction because he felt exactly the same way. But military action required legal authority and political backing. He had already spoken with the civilian leadership. The president had been clear. The assault on Katie Brooks could not stand unanswered. Human children needed to know they were protected no matter where in the galaxy they lived. More importantly, the galaxy needed to know that harming human children had consequences that diplomatic immunity could not prevent. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Plans were drawn up and discarded. Options were weighed. Legal scholars were consulted about the technicalities of council law and human sovereignty. Intelligence assets were activated to locate Commander Zixthar and track her movements. Throughout it all, the video of Katie Brooks played on a screen in the corner of the room. Nobody asked for it to be turned off. They needed to remember what this was about. It was not about politics or territory or pride. It was about a child who had been hurt and a species that would not tolerate it. By the end of the meeting, orders had been cut. They were classified at the highest level. Only a handful of people would know the full scope of what was being authorized. Admiral Hayes personally transmitted the orders to Commander Lisa Grant aboard the stealth frigate Shadow of Earth, currently on patrol near the edge of Council space. The message was brief and encrypted. Find Commander Zixthar. Prepare for direct action. Await final authorization. Lisa Grant received the orders while her ship was docked at a refueling station near the Proxima system. She was 36 years old, a career officer who had earned command of one of humanity's most advanced ships through skill and dedication. She had also lost her younger sister to violence when they were children, killed in a random attack that had torn her family apart. When she watched the video of Katie Brooks, something cold and familiar settled in her chest. She called her senior officers to the briefing room and showed them the orders. Her crew consisted of 43 highly trained specialists. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was her pilot, a young man from Mars who had grown up in higher gravity than Earth and possessed reflexes most humans could not match. Dr. Amy Chen was the combat medic, capable of performing surgery in zero gravity or under fire. Sergeant Marcus Cole led the small Marine detachment, 8 soldiers who specialized in operations that officially did not exist. These were people who had volunteered for dangerous duty because they believed in protecting humanity's future. Now they had a mission that embodied that purpose. The Shadow of Earth departed the station 6 hours later, its stealth systems engaged. On sensor displays, it appeared as nothing more than background radiation. The ship was humanity's answer to the question of how to operate in hostile territory without being detected. Its hull was coated with materials that absorbed radar and bent light. Its engines were baffled to reduce thermal signatures. It could slip through space like a ghost, invisible to most scanners the Council possessed. Meanwhile, across human space, the public reaction was growing into something unprecedented. Protests erupted on Earth and every human colony. Millions of people demanded action. Parents held their children close and wondered if they were safe living among aliens who could strike them without consequence. Politicians faced angry constituents who wanted to know why diplomatic immunity mattered more than justice. The pressure was immense and building. Human diplomats filed formal protests through every available council channel. They demanded immediate action. They requested emergency sessions. They cited council laws about the rights of juveniles and the responsibility of diplomatic personnel. The responses were polite and bureaucratic. The council acknowledged human concerns. They emphasized the importance of following proper procedures. They suggested meditation and counseling services for the affected family. They did everything except deliver justice. What the council did not understand was that they were negotiating with the wrong people. The diplomats were filing paperwork and making speeches because that was their job. But the real decisions were being made by others. Admiral Hayes and the Joint Chiefs were not interested in procedure. They were interested in results, and they had already decided what those results would be. On New Haven, life tried to return to normal, but failed. Katie Brooks came home from the hospital with her face bandaged and her eyes haunted. She had nightmares every night, waking up screaming from dreams of the tall alien hitting her again. Her parents took turns sitting beside her bed, holding her hand until she fell back asleep. Daniel Brooks took leave from his engineering job because he could not focus on water systems when his daughter was suffering. Claire Brooks, who had dedicated her career to peaceful cooperation with alien species, found herself questioning everything she had believed about galactic unity. The colony erected a memorial in the central plaza. It was not a monument to Katie, but rather a promise. The inscription read simply, "Never again." Humans from across the colony came to leave flowers and toys. They stood in silence, each one imagining their own child in Katie's place. The memorial became a gathering place for grief and anger and determination. It reminded everyone why they were human and what that meant. Commander Zix Thar, meanwhile, returned to her duties aboard the Velkari Diplomatic Station High Perch. She filed her inspection report on New Haven, noting significant deficiencies in security protocols and recommending restrictions on human expansion. She made no mention of the incident with the child. In her view, it was a minor matter that humans had blown out of proportion due to their primitive emotional responses. She attended a council gala, discussing trade regulations with other diplomats over expensive wine. She gave speeches about maintaining proper standards among the younger species. She was confident in her diplomatic immunity and the protection of council law. She did not know that 40 light-years away, a ship invisible to sensors was tracking her every movement. She did not know that highly trained soldiers were studying blueprints of her station and planning approach vectors. She did not know that humanity had already tried her in absentia, found her guilty, and authorized sentence. She lived her life as she always had, certain in her superiority and protected by ancient treaties. The galaxy was about to teach her that some species did not care about treaties when their children were threatened. Humanity was coming, and diplomatic immunity would not save her. The shadow of Earth hung in the darkness between stars, running silent with all non-essential systems powered down. Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge watching the sensor displays show absolutely nothing where her ship should be. Perfect invisibility was impossible according to physics, but humanity had learned to bend the rules by studying the predators of Earth. Octopi that changed color and texture, insects that looked like leaves, deep-sea creatures that produced no light. Evolution had taught 1,000 lessons about concealment, and human engineers had learned them all. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat at the helm, his fingers dancing across controls with practiced ease. He had been born on Mars in the higher gravity domes, and his reflexes were faster than Earth-normal humans. He could pilot the ship through asteroid fields at speeds that would terrify most people. Right now, he was keeping them positioned exactly 300,000 kilometers from High Perch Station, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid detection. The station was massive, a diplomatic hub that housed representatives from 40 different council species. It should have been impregnable. For 2 weeks, they watched and learned. They mapped guard rotations and maintenance schedules. They identified docking ports and service corridors. They studied the daily routine of Commander Zixthar until they could predict her movements with reasonable accuracy. She lived in luxury quarters on the upper decks, attended diplomatic functions 3 times a week, and worked regular hours reviewing reports and filing recommendations. She was comfortable and confident. She had no idea she was being hunted. The authorization code came through on a secure channel directly from Admiral Hayes. It was a simple alphanumeric string, but it meant that the civilian government had signed off on the operation and legal protections were in place for everyone involved. Lisa Grant called her senior staff to the briefing room and displayed the code on the screen. There was no celebration. This was not a happy mission. This was necessary. She briefed the team one final time. The operation would take place during the next diplomatic reception, when station security would be focused on protecting the event. A maintenance pod would dock at Auxiliary Port 17, a small airlock used for routine repairs. The pod's identification codes had been provided by human intelligence assets who had spent years infiltrating council systems. Once aboard, the team would have approximately 40 minutes to reach the target, complete the mission, and extract before the security shift change. The strike team consisted of 4 people. Commander Grant would lead because this was her responsibility, and she would not ask others to do what she was unwilling to do herself. Dr. Amy Chen would accompany them because medical expertise might be necessary and because she was also trained in combat operations. Sergeant Marcus Cole would provide security, his reflexes and training honed by years of operations in hostile territory. Lieutenant Jake Morrison would pilot the maintenance pod and maintain the escape route. They went over the plan 3 times, drilling every step until it was automatic. They reviewed contingencies for what would happen if they encountered unexpected guards or if the target was not in her quarters. They confirmed communication protocols and emergency extraction procedures. They checked their equipment twice. Environmental suits designed to function in the cold, low-oxygen service corridors that most council species avoided. Weapons that used electromagnetic pulses rather than projectiles to avoid hull breaches. Recording devices to document everything. The night of the operation, Lisa Grant stood in the armory and looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a black environmental suit with no insignia or identification. If she died tonight, there would be no official acknowledgement. The operation did not exist on any records. She thought about her sister, dead 20 years now, killed by violence that had gone unpunished until it was too late. She thought about Katie Brooks with her broken face and traumatized eyes. She thought about every child who needed adults to stand between them and the darkness. Then she picked up her weapon and went to join her team. The maintenance pod detached from Shadow of Earth at exactly 1900 hours station time. It was small and ungainly, designed for repairs rather than combat. Jake Morrison piloted it with casual expertise, approaching high perch along a trajectory used by dozens of legitimate maintenance crews every day. The stolen identification codes broadcast perfectly. Station traffic control acknowledged their docking request and assigned them to Port 17. Nobody questioned it. Nobody wondered why a maintenance crew was working during a diplomatic reception. It was routine. The pod clanged against the docking collar and sealed with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Lisa Grant led her team through the airlock and into the service corridors of High Perch Station. The temperature was cold, barely above freezing, and the oxygen mix was 30% lower than Earth standard. Most council species would have been uncomfortable. Humans from a death world where their ancestors had climbed mountains and crossed tundra barely noticed. They moved quickly and quietly through passages painted industrial gray, following the maps they had memorized. They encountered no guards, because guards did not patrol service corridors. They passed two maintenance robots that ignored them because their identification codes said they belonged there. They climbed through access shafts and crossed junction points, moving steadily toward the upper decks. After 20 minutes, they reached a sealed door that led to the residential section. Marcus Cole attached an electromagnetic device to the lock and bypassed it in under a minute. The door slid open silently. Commander Zixthar's quarters were at the end of a carpeted hallway decorated with art from a dozen different worlds. The luxury was jarring after the utilitarian service corridors. Lisa Grant checked her chronometer. They had been aboard for 28 minutes. Station security would not change shifts for another 12 minutes. Time was tight, but sufficient. She approached the door to Zixthar's quarters and used another bypass device. The lock clicked open. The alien officer was sitting at her desk, reviewing reports on a holographic display. She wore an elegant robe rather than her uniform. Soft music played from hidden speakers. She looked up when the door opened. Her expression shifting from surprise to irritation, she reached for the communication panel on her desk, probably to call security and complain about the interruption. Marcus Cole was faster, triggering an electromagnetic pulse that disabled every electronic device in the room. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency lighting that cast everything in dim red. The music stopped. The holographic display vanished. Commander Zixthar stood slowly, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, and saw 4 humans in environmental suits with weapons. For the first time since striking Katie Brooks, she felt something that might have been fear. Lisa Grant removed her helmet so Zixthar could see her face. She wanted the alien to know that a human was doing this, not a machine or a faceless soldier. She spoke clearly, her voice recorded by multiple devices. She said that Commander Zixthar had been tried in absentia by a human court and found guilty of assault on a child named Katie Brooks. The sentence was death. Did she have any final words? Zixthar's fear transformed into outrage. She drew herself up to her full height and declared that this was illegal. She had diplomatic immunity granted by the Council. Humans could not simply execute diplomats. This would mean war. The Council would never allow it. She demanded they leave immediately or face consequences. Lisa Grant interrupted calmly. She said that the Council had been given the opportunity to deliver justice. They had chosen procedures and protocols over a child's suffering. Humanity had decided that diplomatic immunity did not extend to those who harmed children. There would be consequences, yes, but they were willing to accept them. She asked again if Zixthar had final words. The alien officer realized then that these humans were serious. She tried to move, perhaps to fight or flee. But Marcus Cole was trained for close-quarters combat, and she was not. It was over in seconds. The execution was precise and professional. Dr. Amy Chen confirmed death. The team placed a small recording device on the desk, programmed to activate and transmit in 30 minutes. Then they left the way they had come. They retraced their path through service corridors, moving quickly now because time was critical. They reached the maintenance pod with 3 minutes to spare before the security shift change. Jake Morrison had the engines powered and ready. The pod detached from high perch and drifted away on maneuvering thrusters, just another piece of routine traffic. Once they were clear of the station's security perimeter, Morrison opened the throttle and accelerated hard toward the prearranged rendezvous point. The shadow of Earth was waiting, still invisible to sensors. The maintenance pod docked and the team came aboard. Lisa Grant went directly to the bridge and ordered maximum speed away from Council space. They would not run from consequences, but there was no point in making capture easy. The ship's engines came to full power, and they vanished into the darkness between stars. 30 minutes later, station security on high perch received an automated alert from Commander Zixthar's quarters. When guards arrived and found the body, chaos erupted. The recording device activated, broadcasting its message on all frequencies. It showed the entire event. Lisa Grant's face clearly visible. Her statement about justice and diplomatic immunity. The execution. And her final words spoken directly to the camera. She said that humanity protected its children and no law or border would stop them. Anyone who harmed human children should know that humans were coming. The Galactic Council chamber erupted into chaos 36 hours after Commander Zixthar's body was discovered. Representatives from 200 species shouted over each other while translators struggled to keep up with the overlapping voices. The Velkari delegation was demanding immediate military action against humanity. Their chief ambassador, an elder statesman named Relthor, slammed his fist on the speaking podium hard enough to crack it. He declared that humans had committed an act of terrorism and proven themselves unfit for council membership. They should be expelled, sanctioned, and, if necessary, brought to heel by force. Other species were less certain. The Marathi representative Solace, who had been present during the original incident on New Haven, tried to explain that the situation was more complex than simple terrorism. Yes, humans had violated diplomatic protocols, but Commander Zixthar had struck a child hard enough to break bones and shown no remorse. Some species understood the human response better than others. The Torvin, who laid eggs and guarded their nesting grounds ferociously, were notably quiet. The Keshar, who carried their young in pouches for 3 years, were asking pointed questions about why Zixthar had not faced any council justice. The council chair, an ancient being from the eldest species called Merchant Lord Vaughn, called for order and silence. When the chamber finally quieted, he reviewed the facts in a voice that carried centuries of diplomatic experience. A human child had been assaulted by a council officer. The council had offered procedures but no immediate justice. Humans had executed the officer and broadcast a message that essentially declared open season on anyone who harmed their young. Now the galaxy faced a choice between war and accommodation with a species that had proven both capable and willing to strike deep into council territory. The Velkari demanded war. They painted humans as dangerous primitives who could not be trusted. They showed population statistics and military assessments that suggested humanity was still relatively weak compared to established council powers. They argued that decisive action now would prevent future violations. They spoke of honor and justice and the sanctity of diplomatic immunity. Their arguments were passionate and found support among the older, more traditional species who valued order above all else. But other voices urged caution. The Kashar representative, a female named Shara who had 12 living children, asked the assembly to imagine their own young being struck by a foreign officer who then faced no consequences. Would they accept it? Would they patiently wait years for justice? Or would they do exactly what humans had done? Her words caused uncomfortable silence because many species realized they would have reacted similarly or worse. The Marathi presented intelligence reports on human capabilities that painted a sobering picture. Humans had stealth technology that council sensors could not detect. They had successfully infiltrated High Perch, one of the most secure facilities in council space. They had executed a precise military operation and extracted without casualties. Intelligence analysts suggested this was not luck, but evidence of extensive preparation and capability that humans had kept hidden. War with humanity might be winnable, but it would be far more costly than the Velkari were suggesting. Economic advisors presented another consideration. In the 20 years since joining the council, humans had become increasingly important to galactic trade. Human colonies produced unique goods, and human merchants had established profitable relationships across dozens of worlds. Human scientists had contributed valuable research. Cutting off that economic relationship would hurt everyone. Sanctions would harm council economies as much as human ones. Admiral Hayes delivered humanity's official response via a recorded message broadcast to every council world. He stood in his uniform with his medals and his gray hair and the weight of command visible in his posture. Behind him was a screen showing two images. The first was Katie Brooks before the attack, smiling with her red ball. The second was Katie after, bandaged and traumatized. The contrast was devastating. He spoke quietly and clearly. He acknowledged that humanity had violated diplomatic protocols. He stated that humans did not care about protocols when they protected those who harmed children. Commander Zixthar had made a choice. She had struck a 7-year-old hard enough to break her face. That choice had consequences. The Council had been given time to deliver justice through their systems. They had chosen procedures over action. So humanity had acted. He continued, his voice hardening slightly. The Council was now threatening sanctions and military force. They seemed to believe they could intimidate humans into compliance. He invited them to remember where humans came from. Earth was a death world where everything wanted to kill them. They had survived ice ages and volcanoes. They had survived predators with claws and teeth. They had survived disease and famine and their own worst instincts, and through all of it, one instinct had kept them alive. Protect the children no matter the cost. He finished with a simple statement. Humans would prefer peace. They valued their relationships with council species. They wanted cooperation and mutual prosperity. But they would never, under any circumstances, allow harm to their children to go unanswered. The Council could accept that or not. The choice was theirs, but they should make that choice, knowing that humanity had already decided its position and would not compromise. The speech was translated into every major language and broadcast across human space. Billions watched it and felt pride mixed with fear. Pride that their leaders would stand up for children. Fear of what might come next. Parents held their children closer and wondered if war was coming. Soldiers reported to their units and prepared for deployment. Colonists on frontier worlds looked up at the stars and wondered if council warships would appear. Katie Brooks watched the speech with her parents on New Haven. Her face was healing, but the psychological damage would take longer. She still had nightmares. She still flinched when tall people moved too quickly near her. But when Admiral Hayes showed her pictures on the screen, her mother Claire held her close and told her that millions of people cared about what had happened. Humans across the galaxy were standing up for her. Katie did not fully understand the politics or the military implications, but she understood that people were angry on her behalf. It helped a little. The Council spent 3 weeks debating while humanity waited. During that time, there were incidents. A human merchant ship was detained at a Velkari checkpoint and held for 2 days before being released without explanation. A human diplomat was asked to leave a council function. Human colonists reported increased hostility from some alien neighbors. But there were also gestures of support. Keshar merchants continued trading with human partners. Torvan scientists collaborated on research projects. Marathi diplomats worked behind the scenes to find compromise. The breakthrough came from Ambassador Krell of the Torvan species. He was an elder statesman who had lived through 3 wars and negotiated 24 peace treaties. He gave a speech before the full council that reframed the entire discussion. He said he had studied the human response and understood it perfectly because Torvan would do exactly the same. His species laid eggs and guarded nesting grounds with lethal force. It was not rational or proportional. It was absolute. Humans were the same with their young. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. Commander Zixthar had not simply committed assault. She had triggered a biological imperative older than civilization. Judging humans for following survival instinct was like judging a star for burning. It was simply what they were. The Council had erred by treating this as a diplomatic incident when it was actually about something far more fundamental. The Velkari objected vehemently. They demanded justice for their slain officer, but other species were listening to Krell with new understanding. The Marathi presented additional evidence about human child protection laws and social structures. Despite their reputation for violence, humans had some of the most comprehensive protections for juveniles in the galaxy. They allocated massive resources to child welfare and education. Their legal penalties for child abuse were severe. They were not mindlessly violent. They were selectively protective. A compromise was proposed after days of negotiation. Humanity would accept council mediation on future diplomatic protocols and agree to work within established channels when possible. In exchange, the council would formally recognize that assault on juveniles of any species, regardless of diplomatic status, would result in immediate revocation of immunity and mandatory prosecution. What happened to Commander Zixthar would be considered a unique circumstance, and no further action would be taken against the Shadow of Earth crew. The agreement was formally titled the Juvenile Protection Accord, but everyone called it the Katie Brooks Law. It established universal protections for children across all council space. Diplomatic immunity would no longer shield those who harmed the young. The penalties would be severe and applied equally regardless of species. The law passed with 70% support, remarkable given how controversial the circumstances were. Admiral Hayes agreed to meet with council representatives on neutral ground to sign the accord. He brought Daniel and Claire Brooks. He brought Katie. The meeting was held on a space station operated by the neutral eldest species. Every major news network in the galaxy carried it live. Billions watched as human representatives sat across from council diplomats and worked out the final details. Katie's presence was calculated. Hayes wanted the council to see her not as an abstract concept, but as a real child who laughed and played and deserved safety. She wore a blue dress her grandmother had sent. Her face was healed except for a small scar on her cheekbone that would fade with time. She sat between her parents and watched the adults talk about things she did not fully understand. The moment that broke through all the diplomatic language came near the end. The new Velkari representative, appointed after the previous delegation resigned in disgrace, approached Katie slowly. The child looked up at the tall alien and felt fear flutter in her stomach. But her father's hand was on her shoulder, and she was brave. The alien knelt down to be at her eye level. The representative spoke in careful English, saying she was sorry for what happened and promising her species would do better. Katie looked at the alien for a long moment. Then she said what her mother had coached her to say. She said, "Okay," but asked the alien not to hit children anymore. The simplicity of that statement, spoken by a 7-year-old who had suffered and survived, resonated across the galaxy. It was replayed billions of times in the following days. A child asking aliens to please not hurt children. The moral weight was undeniable. The treaty was signed with Katie's handprint alongside the official signatures. Photographs showed her small hand next to the elaborate marks of 200 species representatives. It became one of the most famous images in human history. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Human children were protected, and that protection was absolute. 6 months after the treaty signing, New Haven Colony had grown by 2,000 residents and expanded its borders by 20 square kilometers. The Galactic Council had approved the expansion without the usual bureaucratic delays, a small gesture of goodwill in the aftermath of the crisis. Katie Brooks was 8 years old now and back in school, though she still saw a counselor twice a week to work through the trauma. The scar on her cheekbone had faded to a thin white line that would probably disappear completely by the time she was a teenager. The nightmares came less frequently. She was healing. Commander Lisa Grant stood in Admiral Hayes' office on Luna Station, wearing her dress uniform with the Star of Valor pinned over her heart. The ceremony had been classified, attended only by a handful of senior officers who knew the truth about the Shadow of Earth mission. Hayes had personally presented the medal, humanity's highest military honor, and told her that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking rules that no longer served justice. Grant had accepted the medal and immediately placed it in a box. She kept it in her quarters aboard the Shadow of Earth next to a picture of Katie Brooks, smiling, fully healed. The crew of Shadow of Earth had returned to their normal duties after a brief leave period. They conducted deep reconnaissance missions along the frontier, mapping unexplored space and monitoring for potential threats. They never spoke publicly about what had happened on High Perch Station. The mission officially did not exist, but every member of that crew knew they had done something important. They had proven that humanity would protect its children no matter the cost, and that knowledge gave their work deeper meaning. The galaxy was adjusting to the new reality. The Katie Brooks Law was being implemented across council space with surprising cooperation. Several species had reported violations and seen swift justice delivered, which reinforced confidence in the system. Diplomatic immunity still existed, but now had clear boundaries. Attack a child, lose protection. It was simple and absolute. Most diplomats agreed it was reasonable. Those who disagreed kept their opinions quiet because public sentiment overwhelmingly supported the protection of juveniles. Human diplomats reported improved relationships with many council species. The Kashar in particular had become close allies, bonding over shared concerns about child welfare and education. The Torvin maintained their existing partnerships and seemed to respect humanity more after the demonstration of protective instinct. Even the Velkari had slowly begun normalizing relations, though it would take generations for the wound to truly heal. Their new diplomatic corps was carefully trained in cross-cultural sensitivity, with special emphasis on understanding human reactions to threats against children. The incident had also changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. Before, humans had been seen as dangerous newcomers from a violent world, barely civilized enough for council membership. Now they were recognized as fiercely protective allies who valued their young above diplomatic convenience. Some species found this frightening, others found it reassuring. Parents across the galaxy, regardless of species, tended to approve. The knowledge that humans would stand against any threat to children made many beings feel safer. Katie Brooks became a symbol without choosing to be one. Her image appeared in human schools and government buildings, usually the picture of her smiling before the attack. The message was always the same. Children deserve safety. Adults have a responsibility to provide it. She received letters from across human space and even from alien children whose parents wanted them to understand that different species could cooperate to protect the innocent. Katie did not fully grasp her symbolic importance. She was just a kid who wanted to play with her friends and learn about the stars. Her parents struggled with the attention. Daniel Brooks had returned to his engineering work, but found that people treated him differently now. Strangers approached him in public to express sympathy or support. He was invited to speak at events about family safety and children's rights. He declined most invitations because he wanted his daughter to have as normal a life as possible. Claire Brooks had gone back to her xenobiology research, but her focus had shifted. She now studied child development across species, looking for common protective instincts and ways to promote juvenile welfare throughout the galaxy. The memorial in New Haven's Central Plaza became a permanent fixture. Fresh flowers appeared there regularly, left by colonists who wanted to remember and honor what Katie represented. The inscription, "Never Again," remained stark and clear. Visitors from other worlds often stopped there, reading the inscription through their translators and reflecting on what it meant. Some left flowers too. Some left tokens from their own cultures. The memorial became a place where different species acknowledged a shared value that transcended politics and history. Admiral Hayes retired from active duty a year after the crisis, having served 40 years in the fleet. His final speech to the Joint Chiefs addressed the lessons learned from the Katie Brooks incident. He said that military force should always be a last resort, but must remain an option when justice fails. He said that protecting the innocent was not just a human value, but should be a universal one. He said that sometimes breaking rules was necessary to uphold principles that mattered more than protocol. His words were recorded and used in military academies across human space as a teaching tool about ethics and leadership. The Shadow of Earth continued its missions for another 5 years before being decommissioned and replaced by newer ships. Commander Lisa Grant transferred to a training position where she taught reconnaissance and special operations to the next generation of officers. She never spoke publicly about High Perch, but her students knew she had done something significant. Her reputation as someone who understood the real purpose of military service attracted the best candidates. Many of them had children of their own and understood that protecting families was the ultimate reason for having a military. On her 10th birthday, Katie Brooks stood in front of her school and spoke to an assembly of students and parents. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she held her note cards, but her voice was steady. She thanked everyone who had supported her family during the hard time 2 years ago. She said that she still sometimes had bad dreams, but they were getting better. She said that she had learned an important lesson from everything that happened. Sometimes adults had to make hard choices to keep children safe. She said that when she grew up, she wanted to help keep people safe too. Maybe she would be a doctor or a teacher or even join the fleet. She had not decided yet, but she knew she wanted to make sure no other kid had to go through what she had experienced. The galaxy had changed because of what happened to one child on a frontier colony. The change was not dramatic or sudden. It was gradual, a slow shift in attitudes and policies that rippled outward from New Haven across human space and into Council territory. Child protection laws were strengthened, diplomatic protocols were revised, cultural sensitivity training was improved. Parents from different species talked to each other about raising children in a complex galaxy, small changes that accumulated over time into something meaningful. Daniel and Claire Brooks eventually wrote a book about their experience, not as a memoir but as a guide for families dealing with trauma. They discussed Katie's recovery, the therapy that helped, the nightmares that slowly faded, and the importance of letting children be children even after terrible things happened. The book was translated into 40 languages and helped thousands of families across multiple species. The royalties went into a trust fund for Katie's education and a foundation that provided counseling services to families affected by violence. New Haven Colony prospered and grew into a major settlement with over 100,000 residents. The school where Katie had played expanded 3 times. The landing platform where she was struck was renovated and renamed Brooks Plaza in honor of the family's courage and resilience. Nobody forgot what happened there, but the memory became less painful over time. It transformed from a wound into a scar, still visible, but no longer bleeding. Commander Zixthar's name became a cautionary tale in diplomatic schools across Council space. Students learned about the incident as an example of how cultural misunderstanding and arrogance could lead to tragedy. They studied human protective instincts and discussed appropriate responses to children of different species. They learned that diplomatic immunity was a privilege that required responsibility and respect. The lesson was clear. All children deserve protection regardless of species, and those who harmed them would face consequences. Katie Brooks graduated from high school at 17 with honors and a scholarship to attend university on Earth. She had decided to study child psychology with a focus on cross-species trauma recovery. She wanted to help children who had experienced what she had and teach adults how to better protect and support young beings throughout the galaxy. Her parents were incredibly proud. They knew that their daughter had taken something terrible and transformed it into purpose and meaning. On the day she left for Earth, Katie visited the memorial one last time. She stood in front of the statue of the playing child and read the inscription, "Never again." She thought about everything that had happened since she was 7 years old and chasing a red ball across a landing platform. She thought about the pain and fear and nightmares. She thought about the people who had fought for her and the laws that had changed because of her. She thought about all the children across the galaxy who were safer now because adults had decided that protecting the innocent mattered more than convenience or protocol. She placed a single flower at the base of the memorial, a blue bloom native to New Haven that her grandmother had loved. Then she turned and walked toward her future, carrying the lessons of her past but no longer defined by them. She was more than the child who had been struck. She was Katie Brooks, survivor and advocate, and proof that terrible things could be overcome. She was a symbol of humanity's protective instinct, and a reminder that every child, regardless of species, deserved to grow up safe and loved. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity protects its young, and that protection is absolute. No law, no border, no diplomatic immunity would ever change that fundamental truth. Other species understood now, and most of them approved. Because in the end, protecting children was not just a human value, it was a universal one that transcended species and politics and history. It was what separated civilization from barbarism. It was what made the future possible. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, ships like Shadow of Earth continued their silent patrols, watching and waiting, ready to act if anyone ever forgot the lesson that Katie Brooks had taught the galaxy at such terrible cost.